So where does your tax money actually go? We tend to think of the government as this one giant building over in Washington, D.C., right? But the reality is it's this huge, sprawling $8.9 trillion machine with tens of thousands of little parts. Today, we're going to follow the money through this incredibly complex system, and we're using some fantastic data put together by MoneyFacts USA to see exactly how it all works. Okay, let's start with just a number, 90,888. Just let that sink in for a second. Any guesses? It's not the number of laws. It's not the number of federal employees. Nope. That's the number of governments in the United States. That's right, over 90,000 different government bodies in America. And hey, if you didn't know this system went that deep, don't even worry about it. Most people have no idea. It's this incredibly complex web that's way, way more than just the president and Congress. And that really brings us to the big question for today, doesn't it? With all these different hands in the cookie jar, how does this system even work? Who's spending all the cash, and what are they buying with it? So before we can even begin to follow the money, we need to understand the roster. Think of it like a breakdown of all the different government squads out there that get a say in how your tax dollars are spent. Now take a look at this breakdown. The single biggest piece of the pie, it's not cities, it's not even states. It's something called special districts. These are these super focused little governments that do just one thing, like they might manage your local water supply, or run the airport, or even just handle mosquito control. After them, you get the players you're probably more familiar with, your local municipalities and townships, and thousands of independent school districts. And here's how this hits you directly. Let's say you live somewhere in the middle of the country. On any given day, you are paying taxes to your city, to a local fire district, to your county, to a specific school district, to the state government, and, of course, to the federal government. That's at least 6 different groups you're answering to. Okay, so now we know who the players are, it's time to follow the money. And as you're about to see, there is a lot of it to follow. Every single year, when you add up all 90,888 of those entities, the total government spending in the U.S. comes out to a jaw-dropping $8.9 trillion. I mean, that's a number so big, it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. So who's writing the biggest checks? Well, the federal government directly spends the most, about $5.1 trillion. That's for the huge national programs that affect every single one of us. Think Social Security, Medicare, and the military. Then you've got state and local governments, and they each spend around $2 trillion on their own programs. But here's where it starts to get a little tricky. See, the feds don't just spend their own money. They also play middleman, sending over $1 trillion down to state and local governments. This is to help pay for things like roads, schools, and healthcare. It's just a massive transfer of cash. So when you factor in all those transfers, the majority of government spending in America, a full 57% of it, is actually happening at the state and local levels. This is where the money quite literally meets the road. All right, we know who spends it, but what are they spending it on? Let's break it down into the 5 biggest categories that eat up most of that $8.9 trillion budget. The spending really comes down to 5 key areas that shape our daily lives. At the very top, you have support for individuals in need. That's things like Medicaid and food assistance. Then you've got education for our kids, transportation to get us around, the criminal justice system, and public health services. These 5 pillars are really the core of what our government does with our money. Now, check this out. We hear a lot about federal education policy, right? But when it comes to who's actually paying the bills, the feds only chip in about 10% of the money. The other 90%? That comes directly from your state and local governments. That's exactly why your local property taxes are so tied to how good your local schools are. And you know what? It's a pretty similar story with criminal justice. This is almost entirely a local game. State and local governments have 6 times more police officers on the payroll than the feds, and a staggering 88% of all prisoners are held in state or local facilities, not federal ones. All right, you can't spend trillions if you're not collecting trillions. So let's flip the coin for a second and look at where all this money actually comes from in the first place. The federal government, they kind of keep their revenue stream pretty simple. The huge majority of their money comes from the 2 things you see on every single one of your pay stubs: individual income taxes and payroll taxes for things like Social Security and Medicare. States, on the other hand, they have to get a little more creative. They've got this kind of diverse hustle going on to pay their bills. The biggest chunks of their funding come from sales tax, that little extra bit you pay at the cash register, and in a lot of states, their own income taxes.
And then you get to the local level, and here there is one undisputed king: property tax. A whopping 69% of all local government funding comes from taxes on homes and buildings. This is the money that pays for your local schools, your police officers, your firefighters.
So how all of this comes together, how much you pay and what you actually get for it, it totally depends on where you live. The tax burden is absolutely not created equal across the country. This table really shows the different trade-offs that states have to make. You got 9 states like Florida and Texas with 0 income tax. That can be a huge draw for people moving. But then you've got 5 other states like Oregon and Delaware with 0 sales tax. And property taxes, they can swing wildly from super low in a state like Hawaii to incredibly high in New Jersey. The government always gets its cut. It's just a matter of how.
So you might be wondering, why? Why is the system so incredibly complex and all over the place? Well, it goes right back to the very foundation of the country. The 10th Amendment basically says that if the Constitution doesn't specifically give a power to the feds, then that power belongs to the states.
And that right there is the crucial point. This system isn't messy by accident. It is messy by design. It creates this constant push and pull, this nonstop debate between all 90,888 of these governments over who pays for what, who's in control, and who gets to make the rules. Which really leaves us with one last question. Now that you've seen the receipts, now that you've followed the $8.9 trillion trail, what's your take? Is this decentralized